What's up? What's going on, everybody? We're gonna do a little bit of N64 modding today, as I often do. We have this absolutely disgusting N64 that came from Japan. This thing is a horror show. It's a horror show. But we're gonna be doing some upgrades. We're gonna be recapping the motherboard. We're going to be installing the N64 RGB V1. And then, once we're done with all of that, we're going to be installing it into a nice new green reproduction shell. We'll also be ultrasonic cleaning the board because I already know that it's a nightmare inside of here. I haven't opened it, but I've peeked in through the massive holes and it does not look good. So, let's go ahead and just jump right into it. We're gonna go ahead and just pop this thing open and see just how horrifying this is. My basic plan for this operation is simple. I'm gonna crack it open. I'm going to assess the situation, and then the first task is going to be to recap the motherboard. And then once I get the recap done, then I'm going to ultrasonic clean it. And then once the ultrasonicing is done, then we will move on to installing the RGB mod. Okay. Well, it's all falling apart here. I don't know what causes this to happen with N64s, but a lot of these N64s are just super brittle. The plastic's super brittle and it just falls apart on you. It's crazy. All right, let's see if we got all the screws. No, this is it's just a completely falling apart on me here. All right, I think I got all the screws out of the bottom. I can clean that up a little bit there. All right. Let's go ahead and get this motherboard out of here. Now this is confirmed to be working, the motherboard. I've checked to make sure that this actually does boot and play games properly and everything, so it's working. It's just a disaster. Alrighty, let's see what we got inside of here. Well, you know, it doesn't really look that bad. It's kind of dusty, but I don't see any little critters or anything inside of here, so that's nice. So we'll go ahead and just get this out of here. And we need to salvage the screw posts, or the thread inserts here. And we need to salvage the LED light pipe. The rest of this can go in the trash. And the bottom doesn't look bad either. Amazing. All right, let's first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and recap the board. Once we get the board recapped, I'm gonna throw it in the ultrasonic cleaner to get it all cleaned up, and then we'll install the RGB mod after that. The reason we're gonna ultrasonic clean it before installing the RGB mod is just because once the RGB mod is installed, it gets a lot trickier to... Basically, the RGB mod ends up being attached to the heatsink, and I don't want to ultrasonic clean the board with the heatsink on. So pretty much before we install the mod, that's when you want to do the ultrasonicing if you're going to do it. So we'll go ahead and start recapping. Grab my caps kit. Alrighty, that should be all the caps we need. So, what we're gonna do is just start pulling capacitors off. Now, today, for our cap removal, we're going to be using my hot tweezer tool. Very exciting. The hot tweezers make this recapping job so much easier. And I'm going to demonstrate that right now. So we'll go ahead and just start pulling some capacitors off. So what I like to do is I like to add a little bit of solder to the tweezers. And then we just go in and grab a capacitor. Adding the solder to the tip just helps to transfer the heat more evenly as you go in, because the contact points on these on these hot tweezer tips is kind of small. So when you pre-tin the tip, you just give it a little bit more, thermal transfer capability when you put them on the pads. And one of the things that you'll notice if you do a lot of these is that when you start to pull the capacitors off of the board, the ground pad is more difficult. The negative side of the capacitor is always more difficult to get off than the positive side because it's connected to the ground pore. So it provides more thermal load than the positive side. So if you get the solder thoroughly heated up and then you pull up on the positive side first, then the negative side, that tends to work better because more of the, I guess, the thermal capacity of the soldering iron is being directed into the ground once you've got the positive plane pulled up. At least that's how it works on this particular hot tweezer set that I use, because it's a Metcal set, and both of the tips on the hot tweezers are pulling from the same 80-watt power supply. So if you pull one side of the capacitor up, then that means that you're no longer dividing that 80 watts as evenly across the positive and negative side of the capacitor. You are able to put more energy into the negative side once you've got the positive side lifted up, if that makes any sense. All right, there you go. That's all the capacitors off. Now, to prep for installing the new capacitors on, I'm going to go ahead and clean all the pads, and then I'm going to re-tin them all. All right. All pads are clean. Let's go ahead and tin them up. Now I'm gonna go ahead and tin the positive pads on all of these, because that just will make it easier whenever it comes time to place them. I don't want to tin the positive and the negative, as you'll see why here in a minute. It's my installation strategy relies on having only one pad tinned first, and then you do the other one afterwards. Okay. We'll start out by replacing the 220 microfarad capacitors. Okay, so basically what we want to do is we want to heat the pad that we tinned already and put the capacitor in place. And then, now that it's in place, we'll just come around back and we'll solder the back side of the capacitor, the negative lead, in now. Just by flowing some solder onto the pad there. All right, there's the 220s in. We'll move on to the 33 microfarad capacitors. These capacitors are for the audio section, and a lot of times these capacitors will fail short. If you ever have an N64 that doesn't have audio, one of the first areas that I would recommend checking is these 33 UF capacitors, because these oftentimes will fail. They'll fail short, and it will kill the audio output from the amplifier. But if you replace the capacitors, it fixes the problem. All right, we'll do the 10 microfarad capacitors now. Oh, my bad, you couldn't see that. Okay, I got a little bit of excess solder here because the angle that I was working at is not very convenient. So I'm just going to add some more solder. Some clean solder, and just pull it out of the joint to get rid of that excess. Alright, that's all the 10 microfarad capacitors. Now, everything that's left on the board is 68 microfarad capacitors. All the way. All right. Quick double check just to make sure I actually soldered in both leads of every capacitor. It looks like I did. Alrighty. So this board is fully recapped and ready to go into the ultrasonic cleaner. So we're going to go ahead and do that real quick. I'm going to drop that in there. While this board is ultrasonic cleaning, we're going to work on a few other things that we need to get done. First of all, we're going to prep the RGB mod. So we've got our ribbon cable here. We're going to go ahead and trim that to the correct number of wires. Let's see. Hold on. So we got the correct number of wires now. And we'll go ahead and strip it. I like to score it with an X-Acto knife. Yokoso Otaku. Good to see you. Glad you were able to get it working. Obi-Wan, we will not be doing the power supply, not recapping the power supply, because this board doesn't have this N64 doesn't have a power supply dedicated to it. At this time, it just came in with no power supply, so I'm just using my my kind of test power supply that I keep here at the workbench. But I have recapped those power supplies before for customers. This is not a customer system. This is actually one that's going to be up for sale when I get done with it. I try to keep a few pre-modded systems up for sale these days. And I've been out of N64s for a little while, so. Alright, so I've got these stripped. Let's go ahead and tin the wires. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and trim these wires down because I stripped them a little bit too long. All right, and then one of the wires gets stripped and peeled off so that it can reach the 12-volt pad, because I keep the 12-volt pad further away from everything else. All right. Eric Johnson, the cable that I'm using here is included. I've got it. I already send them out with the cable cut to the correct length and everything. So you've got everything you need to install with my kit on my website. So we're just going to go in here, add a little bit of flux, and just start soldering in each wire one by one. Oh, I cut the wrong number of pins off of here. Okay, so I've got one too many, so I'm going to peel that extra wire off. Then I'm going to come in here with the X-Acto knife and split this last one off. And then we'll just nudge it over to keep it far away from the digital section of this board. Okay. I'm gonna come back through here and touch up these joints just a little bit because they don't have much solder on them, so just a little bit of extra solder. All right, that's prepped. Okay, so we'll go ahead and prep the analog portion of the board as well. So we're going to take this excess wire that we stripped off of that main cable. We're going to fold it over like so, and then we're going to cut it in half because we only need half of the length. So now we just take this half length of cable that we cut here, and this should have 6 wires on it, which this does. So we'll just go ahead and score this like we did on the main cable. Okay. Then we strip it like so. And then we'll tin this as well. I'm going to trim these down a little bit too. Had to straighten those out a little bit. They were a little bent out of shape just a little bit. All right. Trim these down just a smidge. Okay, same concept as before. We're gonna go ahead and tin these pads. Then we're gonna bring our wire in here and just tack it in place. And that looks pretty good. Alright, so this is a CPU 05 motherboard, so it's going to need one of the MAVNUS adapters. So we'll go ahead and get that installed too. And we'll just tin the pads like we would normally for anything else. Now, on here, on the MAVNUS adapter, you only need to connect from the top, the D0 pad, down to the ground pad. The bottom 3 wires here don't connect to anything, and you don't connect anything to that VCC pad there. So we're going to go ahead and split those 3 wires off. We'll split those, pull them away, and then we're just going to solder everything else to the MAVNUS adapter. The reason we don't use the VCC pad is because in my design, this version of the mod that I put together here, it has an integrated 3.3 volt regulator. So instead of using VCC, we're going to use a 12 volt pad on the motherboard to get power to the regulator, and then that is what will actually power the mod. Let's see. Okay, that should hold it in place temporarily. Give me a second, I gotta pull the board out of the Sonic. Okay, the board has to go through a final step of an alcohol bath, and that's what it's doing right now. And then it'll be ready to use. Okay, that looks good. Then we got to prep the analog breakout board. This is what actually connects to the AV port. All right, same deal again. We're gonna flux. Then we're going to come in here and tack the pins in place. Those actually look really good already, so we're done prepping the breakout board. Now, here's something about the breakout board. You'll notice that up here you have a little jumper that says comp and Luma. What that is for is to direct the C-Sync 75 ohm C-Sync signal from the mod to either the composite video pin on the multi-out or the S-Video Luma pin on the multi-out. The reason for that is because if you are using a sync on Luma or sync on composite SCART cable, then you might need to have the sync signal generated by the mod to go to one of those pins. Like, for example, if you're using an HD Retrovision cable, those use composite for sync instead of C-Sync. So, if you want the correct sync signal that's generated by the RGB mod to be the sync signal that's used on your HD Retrovision cable or your SCART cable, then you'll need to set one of these either to composite or Luma, depending on your cable. And then on your N64 motherboard, you'll need to remove some components, a capacitor and a resistor, to disconnect the old Luma or composite signal off of there. Now, I don't recommend doing this. I would use a C-Sync cable, so I never set up my mods for composite or Luma, but the option is there if you need it, if you are using something like an HD Retrovision cable that doesn't have the option to do C-Sync. I just wanted to explain that so that y'all know the reason why I'm not actually setting that jumper. All right, there's a little bit of prep work we need to do on the shell as well while we wait for the alcohol bath to finish. The main thing is that we need to get the springs out of the cartridge slot from the old shell. Because we need those for the cartridge slot on the new shell. So just these springs are all we need. Then we'll go ahead and install the cartridge doors. I'm going to be installing my region-free N64 cartridge slot insert. All right, we'll just slide these in place. Take our cartridge slot insert, pop that in place, and then get it screwed in. Okay, so our cartridge doors are in. And our motherboard is done with its alcohol bath. So what we're going to do now is we're going to dry this off real quick with this little vacuum here. Alrighty. So now we have a fresh, clean N64 motherboard to work off of. Let's go ahead and start installing this mod here. So we'll start here with the AVDC NUS, which is basically the same thing as the MAV NUS. It's just the earlier generation of it. So I'm going to go ahead and flux this area, and then I'm going to go ahead and tin the AVDC NUS by flowing a ton of fresh solder onto it. If you add fresh solder to the joints, it makes it easier to solder in mods and flex cables and everything. Anytime you're adding new devices to an old board, it's a good idea to just flow some new solder into the joints. Okay, so we're gonna line this up on the AVDC NUS like so. So the first pin of the MAV NUS adapter should basically just be on the first pin of the AVDC NUS or MAV NUS, depending on which model you have. Like, whoop, I had it. Like so. Yeah, that should be good. All right, so we're gonna hit this with some more flux. We're gonna put some solder on our soldering iron tip, and then we're just gonna go ahead and just come in here and start flowing solder in. And that is probably good, actually. Let's zoom in real quick. Yeah, that looks good. So now we're gonna take the wire, flip it over, and just fold it over like so. Then these 3 wires that we pulled out of the way earlier, we're gonna pull those. We're gonna try to get this over top these capacitors and fold the wiring again so that it lines up with the edge of the cartridge slot, like so. And then these 3 wires that come off of here, 2 of them are gonna go down here to the PIF, and that's going to be where the controller connections are made. And then one of them is going to go up to the 12-volt line. Okay, so we'll split these 2 apart. Okay, on this motherboard, we're going to be using pin 16 and pin 27. So we just go ahead and tin those. Now you can see that pin 27 goes down to the reset switch. So that's going to be our reset line. And then pin 16 actually goes to controller 1. You look here. Controller 1, pin 2, that's the data pin for controller 1. And then pin 16, those are connected together. So that's going to be our control line. If you look on the mod, right here, you've got control, then you've got reset. So control's on the left, reset is on the right. So that means control is this pin here, reset is this pin here. So we're going to go ahead and wire the right-hand pin to the reset pin on the PIF NUS. Like so. And then we're going to take the control pin and wire that down to pin 16, which is the controller 1 data pin. And that's that. Okay, and then the last one is the 12-volt pin, which goes right over here. 12-volt in is right here, so we just put some solder on that leg there. We take this wire, solder it in place, and now we've got power. So you can trim this wire shorter, but I don't bother doing that because 12-volt doesn't lose as much, doesn't really lose as much. There's not as much resistance. Well, no, there's the same amount. It doesn't lose as much amperage over a longer length than lower voltages do. So you don't really have to worry about trimming like an inch off of this wire here. That's basically what I'm trying to say. Okay, so that's that. One thing I am going to do real quick is this heatsink is pretty gross. So I'm going to spray this down with some alcohol. And I'm going to brush it clean. Hopefully I can make this look a little bit nicer. Looks a little better. So now the heatsink is just going to go right on top, like so. And then we're going to take our adhesive pad. We're going to stick that right here, covering up the JTAG port because you don't want that exposed. Okay, then we just flip it over, line the edge of the mod up to the edge of the heatsink, and just press it down. And that's pretty much it for the digital side of the mod. I'm going to go ahead and pop the 2 heatsink screws in to hold this heatsink in place. We'll flip it over. The last part is on the back side here, just the analog section. Now, since this is a CPU 05 board, this doesn't have C-Sync built into it already, so we don't have to remove any components back here. All we have to do is take our AV breakout board and line it up over the AV port, and then we just take the excess wire and fold it back underneath like so. So it's nice and neat. And we'll just solder this in place. Okay, that's done. Oh, give me just a second here. I knocked over a beverage, which is always a great thing to do in your workshop. Conveniently, it knocked over right onto a rag that I had over here for for cleanup. So not much of it actually ended up places it's not supposed to go. Could have been much worse. All right. Should be good to go now. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a quick test run on this before we start putting it back together. Okay, let's hop over to game capture. Hold on. Come on, Retro Tink. Okay, it's kind of strange. Let's see. The heck is going on here? I have video on my CRT, but my Retro Tink is being weird. Okay, there we go. Well, give me a second here. Where's my deoxit? This AV port may be a little dirty, which is not surprising given the condition of the board overall. Although I would have thought the ultrasonic bath would have done a good job there. But it may not have been enough. Okay, let's give this another shot. Okay, there you go. Looks pretty good now. Let's get a controller in here. Alrighty, let's go do some Super Mario 64, of course. Well, there you go. Okay, let's see if our IGR functions are working. So we should be able to, yep, we can turn off on and off deblur. We can turn on and off 15-bit color mode. And we can reset the game. So that's all looking good. No sound, you say? Well, that's definitely not true.
Mario.
Because I've got sound here.
Hello. Okie dokie.
Are you sure there's no sound? I have the sound turned down low, but I did just turn it up. Is it good now? Can you hear it? You still can't hear it? What the heck? It says on this, hold on. OBS says I'm getting audio from it. Okay. okay, yes, so it is working. Okay, cool. I just had it turned down because I didn't want to, like, completely blast you guys with sound whenever I fire it up. Alright, so that's all looking good. All the functions of the mod are working correctly. So, let's go ahead and just put this thing back together and we'll be done for the night. Alrighty. So, guys, since I've got you here, what are all your thoughts about the N64? Do you like it? You hate it? Big fans? I want to know everybody's N64 opinions. It's a polarizing console, so, you know. I always wonder what people think of it. Okay, we'll go ahead and pop the rear shield back on. Oh, this one's... Well, you know what? That's not surprising, but this one's bent a little bit probably because the shell was completely smashed. So it's probably taken some impact in the past. Eric Johnson, yes, this will work with every model of N64. It doesn't matter which one it is. The oldest models, the CPU 01 through 04, I think, those don't need the MAV NUS adapter because they have the VDC NUS, which is an older, larger DAC chip that doesn't require an adapter to solder to because it's got larger pins. It's an SOIC chip instead of this. I don't know. Is the MAVNUS, is that a TSOP package, or I think it might be a TSOP package. It's a lot smaller, harder to solder to. But yeah, if you have one of the older board revisions, you can still use this mod. It just doesn't need the MAVNUS adapter. But if you have an 05 or newer, then you need the MAVNUS adapter to go with it. Obi-Wan, yes. You know, what do you mean the video is bootleg? What does that mean? I think that the N64 is a piece of crap console. I work on them all the time. It's like the most common thing that I do. I fucking hate the thing. Whenever I was a kid, we had an N64, and my cousin had a PlayStation, and I wanted a PlayStation so bad. I don't really hate the N64. I'm being hyperbolic, but I definitely don't love it. The N64 is the retro console that I revisit the least, for sure. I think the graphics are ass, and I know the PlayStation has its own problems with graphics. You know, it's not like you can't criticize the PlayStation's graphics, but there's something about the PlayStation that I just prefer. I just prefer the PlayStation. I think it looks cool, you know? Not good, necessarily, but cool. It embodies a style of a time period, which I guess the N64 does too, but the PlayStation, to me, the chunkiness of the PlayStation it's endearing in a way that the N64 is not as much to me. I like the higher resolution textures on PlayStation games. Dang it, I made a mistake. I accidentally did not put the AV cover on. I do that almost every time. Let's see if I can get this in here without having to completely remove all the screws. I think I can do it. Nope, I can't. What a waste. Oh, Eric Johnson. Eric. For the earliest revisions of the motherboard, they have C-Sync signal on the board, which it conflicts with the C-Sync signal on the mod. The mod outputs its own C-Sync signal because the timings for the graphics from the RGB mod are slightly different. So to keep everything centered correctly on the screen, it puts out its own kind of modified C-Sync signal. And if you have one of the earliest revisions of the N64 that have the C-Sync line connected on the AV port, then you just have to remove the capacitor and resistor that goes to that. I think I actually have an example over here. I do have an example. Let's see. This is a CPU02 board. This is junk. This board is a donor board for parts because it's not working. But CPU02 board, you can see that the VDC NUS is a wider pitch chip than the AVDC NUS. But on the back here, C-Sync, you can see is actually connected. It says S right there. That's the sync signal. That line goes down to this capacitor C22 and this resistor R14. You have to remove those two components. If you remove those two components, that disconnects C-Sync from the AV port, and then you can install this mod like normal. Yeah, Eric, if, CPU 05, you don't need to remove anything. Anything past, I think CPU 02 might be the last one that actually has sync on it, so I'm pretty sure anything past 02, you don't have to remove any components. This last screw is always tricky to get in there. I use my smaller PH1 screwdriver, which is not really the right size, but it works okay because you can angle it in there a little bit better. All right, just a few more to go here. Okay, top shell, and then we'll be done. All right. Now, if you're installing into a new shell like this, the screw threads have never been cut before. So you want to be very careful the first time you install the screws that they go in straight. Because if they go in at an angle, then it's going to be bad news. It could potentially break the screw post inside of there if it goes in at an angle. So you want to make sure you very carefully drive these screws in the first time. Once you've driven them in once, then the threads are cut, and then you can always try to, clock the screw backwards to drop into the existing thread that you've cut, and it's safe to take it apart and put it back together later in the future. But you got to be real careful the first time that you get them in straight, because you do not want a screw going sideways and splitting the post in half. These shells are pretty forgiving. They're not super brittle. The plastic that they're using for these reproduction shells seems to be pretty good quality, and it's kind of soft. So you have a little bit of wiggle room with it, but you still don't want to push your luck on it. Eric, the AV breakout board comes with the kit automatically. You have to add the MAV board if you have a MAV NUS or an AVDC NUS. But the AV breakout is included standard with the kit. And if you're going to recap your board, then I would recommend getting a kit from Console 5. Console5.com, I believe. That's really the best place to get it because they have the kits already ready to go with the correct capacitors, and they have a diagram that you can look at that will tell you where to install each type of capacitor. So it makes it very easy to do a cap kit if you use Console 5. All right, that's finished. Let's go ahead and pop our jumper pack back in. Pop in a cartridge and do one last little test run before we call it a night. Do some Mario Kart. Obi-Wan? Which one do I like working on the best? That is a great question. I want to say I probably actually... Well, hold on, let me think here. I probably actually like working on the N64 the best. I do it the most. It's the one that I'm most comfortable with. It's pretty easy to work on. Pretty much everything is pretty easy to work on about the N64. It's easy to take apart, easy to put back together. I really don't have any complaints about the N64, to be honest with you, aside from just that I personally don't enjoy it as a console. The Wii is awful. I work on them. I'm good at working on them. I'm pretty efficient, pretty fast at working on the Wii at this point, but that doesn't change the fact that it is an abysmal experience to work on because of exactly what you said. Too many screws. It's not just too many screws, it's so many different types of screw, and it's so many layers. There's so many layers to the Wii. Different individual little pieces of plastic and metal shielding and stuff to keep track of, plus different types of screws. It's awful. And then there's cables and ribbon cables and stuff that connect together. It's just extraordinarily overcomplicated. The GameCube is not very fun to work on either because of this too many screws issue. But it's not as bad as the Wii. I do really like working on PlayStations. They're very simple. Very simple construction, easy to get into, easy to work on. I might hate the Xbox 360 the most, but I don't really do work on Xbox 360s. Not anymore. I used to be a repair technician, and we would do Xbox 360s from time to time. There was a period of time where we did a lot of Xbox 360s because I was a repair technician at an electronics repair store back in like 2012, 2013. And I absolutely hate working on Xbox 360s. It's just such a pain getting in and out of them. The way that they're constructed really pisses me off. You know, I've not done a gym at all yet. I want to... I intend to offer services for installing retro gyms, but I wanted to mod my own PS2. And the issue with that is that I have a PS2 Fat that I use as my primary PS2, but it's an SCPH 3900. And those are not supported. You can't install a gem on those. It's got to be like a 50... Or no. Yeah, I think it has to be a 50 something, 5900 or 5500. 5500 I think is the lower limit of what you can install a gem on. So I can't do it on my PS2, and that's really killed my enthusiasm to do it. I do have a slim PS2 that I've been using for designing my iFlash flex cable. Speaking of which, the iFlash flex cable is actually on its way here right now. So as soon as I get it, we're gonna be good to go. Oh, you know what, Obi-Wan? You're right. The 3900 is supported. I have an SCPH 3500. It's not supported, even with the power supply change, because apparently the DAC is different on it, and Dan was talking about it a long time ago, where he was saying that like the audio and video are split into two different chips or something on the 3500 and lower, and that it was too complicated for them to figure out a flex cable solution that would work for both the later and the earlier versions, so they abandoned support for them. That's what I remember being the case. Now, don't quote me on that, but I do remember that conversation happening. So yeah, it sucks because that PS2 that I have, it's got a mod chip installed in it. I love that PS2. I've had it for years and years. It's set up exactly the way I want it, but you know, I can't install a gem in it, so I've got it running to the RetroTink 4K right now with HD RetroVision component cables, and it's nice, and I think I'm happy with that. But it would have been cool to be able to do a gem. But if you ever want to do like a really top-notch SD card mod, the iFlash Flex cable that I'm working on right now is going to let you connect an iFlash SD card adapter, these are meant for iPods, but it's a really good SD card adapter that supports SD cards. I think it's up to 2 terabytes that it supports. So you can install that on a PS2 Slim and be able to run games off of the SD card as if you had a hard drive connected. How hard is the iFlash Flex install? Well, I haven't done it yet because I just designed the Flex cable and it's been in production for like a week or two. But it will be here later this week, and I intend to actually do an installation stream. It should be pretty easy to install because the Flex cable is designed to make the soldering as simple as possible. The only thing is you have to have an SCPH 70,012, I think is the highest revision. If it's anything above the 70,000 range, then you can't use the Flex cable. Eric, the flux I use for most of my soldering is this right here. It's MG Chemicals 836 LFNC. This stuff is great. It's it's a liquid. It doesn't make much of a mess. You can easily clean it off. You can easily clean it with alcohol if you want to. You don't have to clean it. If you don't clean it off, your solder joints will end up turning kind of dull in color, but it doesn't affect, like, they won't be shiny after a little while because that flux will sit there and it, I think there may be a little bit of surface corrosion that happens on the top of the solder, but in my experience, I've got stuff that I've soldered with that flux and not cleaned for, 5 or 6 years that still works perfectly, no issues. But you could use the other flux that I use, although a lot less often, would be Amtech. This is a new version of what used to be Amtech NC350 or NC559, I believe. This is like the newest generation of that flux. It's good, but it's very messy. The only way, if you use this flux, this is the best flux I've ever used in terms of its actual, like, flux capabilities, but it is very messy. If you don't have an ultrasonic cleaner, don't even think about it, because this stuff it's like goo, and it's super sticky, and it does not dissolve in alcohol. So I have to run it through the ultrasonic cleaner with distilled water, and I use Branson EC detergent in my ultrasonic cleaner, and then it goes into an alcohol bath after that. That's how you clean that stuff. I don't use this for modding work. I only use this in production if I'm actually soldering boards that if I'm producing a run of boards where I'm soldering in connectors and stuff, I'll use that flux for that work, because all of those are going to go through the ultrasonic cleaner before they come out. Yeah, if you're using a paste, it's probably rosin flux, which is also really sticky and difficult to clean. So, but it does clean with alcohol. So rosin flux is good. It's just kind of old school. Alrighty, well, we'll shut that down. And that's pretty much all there is to it. This N64 went from being an absolute nightmare at the beginning of the stream to being a beautiful, brand new looking jungle green N64. So that's how I do it. Oh, Obi-Wan, I was talking about Eric. He said that he was using an MG Chemicals paste, and I'm assuming it's probably some kind of a rosin-based flux. But yeah, if you use the NC 559, yeah, it's messy. Alrighty, well, this is going to end up on my website probably tomorrow. So if anybody wants to buy it, it'll be there. Does anybody have any questions about anything before we sign off here? Obi-Wan, it's going to be a little bit more than $1, but but it will be available for sale. Awesome, Eric. If you have any issues, you can let me know. And yes, Obi-Wan, I know it's a RoboCop meme. I'm aware. But Eric, if you have any issues, you can always reach out to me on my contact form. And this stream is perfect for you because this is the exact same motherboard that you have. So should be instructive there. But anyways, well, guys, it's been fun. I'm glad people came out to hang out. I always enjoy chatting with people on stream. I'm hoping to do a Wednesday stream to do that iFlash Flex cable install. So if you're interested in it, I know Obi-Wan, you don't have a compatible PS2, but if you're interested in seeing it, in case you might consider getting a compatible PS2 and doing that mod at that point, then if you want to come check it out, I think I'm shooting for Wednesday. I think the parts should be here on Tuesday, so I should be able to stream on Wednesday. If anything changes, you'll know because I won't do a stream. So anyway, thanks for coming out, guys. We'll catch you next time.